I've got a confession to make here. This one took me a little while to get into, not gonna lie. I think that's mainly thanks to one of the most unforgiving yet common sense difficulty curves I've ever encountered in gaming, and I'll certainly talk about why this is later on, but I at least wanted to start this video off on an honest note in letting you know that if you also decide to try this one out for the first time, like going through any sort of relationship breakup, you'll find yourself saying the phrase, "It's not you, it's me." Now, have you ever played a medieval game and thought to yourself, it's a shame that there isn't anything out there that tries to keep things as historically accurate as possible these days? The medieval period was brutal for everyone, especially the peasantry, so it's a shame that you don't get to experience that. BAM! Here you go! Kingdom Come Deliverance is a first-person medieval RPG sim, sort of, that's set in the Kingdom of Bohemia during the 15th century. The wider part of the story is set during a real civil war that took place between the crown and a contender for the throne, though based on what you end up doing during most of the game, you can just forget that a civil war is even taking place, because instead, you play the part of Henry, and just Henry, sometimes Hal, and I'm not sure if this ever explained why some people refer to him as that. You are the son of a local blacksmith from the village of Skalitz, a small settlement notable only for a tiny castle and the nearby silver mines. You have so far spent your life as any respectable son of a peasant would, that being disobeying your father by learning the sword, banging the innkeeper's daughter, and redecorating the walls of the local upstart's house in shit. After what can only be described as one of the tamest bollockings I've ever seen being given by your father, you assist old Pops in forging a sword for your local lord, who immediately takes a liking to you, presumably being impressed by how well you knocked over a stick during that one cutscene, and absolutely nothing to do with what I can only describe as one of the most underwhelming plot twists I've ever seen, but never mind that now, lad. This is all cut short when the Civil War suddenly shows up at the walls, bringing a ton of Cumin with them. Oh, sorry, that's a typo there. That should be Cuman, who are a Southern Eurasian confederation in real life, but are essentially just stormtroopers in this game. This army immediately attacks the village, sacking and massacring everything and everyone, including your own parents, of which you get a front row seat for, because we've got to give you some motivation after all, nah I mean, and you are forced to escape. The beginning section of this game does an absolutely fantastic job at letting you know just what to expect going forwards, and from a design point of view, I honestly think that it's nothing short of genius. Let me explain. From a story point of view, the very beginning section of the game lulls you into a false sense of security before your entire world might as well be destroyed. But the thing is, that's not the genius part I was referring to. What's absolutely fantastic is how the game shows you the ropes during the part before the attack on your village. This game doesn't hold your hand in the slightest, but will let you know the rules of engagement, so to speak. One of the first quests is given to you by your father. He wants you to run some errands. He wants some charcoal, some chilled ale from the tavern, and the local deadbeat owes him money for tools that he sold him recently, but failing that, you're just to get the tools back off of him if he's broke. The easy objective to start with would be to buy the charcoal, but the problem is you have no money. So it was for this reason I went to the tavern first and picked up the ale. Keep this in mind, as this decision of mine will be relevant later on. Then I realised that in order to get the charcoal, I needed to get the money from this bum who owes dad first. So you go over and speak to him. He refuses to pay up. You can try to pass a speech check if you want, but you're most likely going to fail it since you didn't spec into speech at the start, which will lead to a fight. If you win, he'll give you the keys to a nearby trunk with some tools in it. You can then sell these to the local trader for money, which you can then use to buy the charcoal. If you lose the fight, you'll need to limp back home and have mother patch you up before having another go. You can also get lockpicks from someone else in the village, which you can then use to pick the lock on his trunk for the goods if you'd rather do that instead. I then went back to father to turn everything in that he asked for, except there was a problem. Because I went to get the ale first, that meant that it had been outside for a while now and it was no longer chilled. He sent me back to the tavern to pick up another one as punishment. What all of this teaches the player is that while you've got your objective, there isn't exactly a correct way of going about it. A lot like how it is in Morrowind, what's right is what works. Not only that, but some objectives will be time sensitive, and this will not always be obvious when so. The general rule I found is that if a quest tells you to be at a certain place at a certain time, then you'd better be there or it'll count as a fail. For example, later on in the game, I was given a side quest to convince a local lord to buy horses from this one's stables. The lord was open to the idea but needed convincing. He decided that a race was in order and that I needed to participate in it by entering on one of these horses. The race was set for the next day. In the meantime, I picked up another quest from this same lord and was away for several days doing that. Now, I was under the impression that this was Skyrim, and so naturally, everything in the world is on pause until the player shows up. Turns out no, that's not true here at all. While he thanked me upon my return for taking care of that other task, he did however berate me for not showing up for the race. I was then marked as having failed that quest and was never allowed to attempt it again. Which makes sense when you think about it, as that's what would have happened in real life. I felt a little annoyed about it, but at the same time, much respect to the game for doing this, and lessons certainly learnt. Speaking of treating this game like Skyrim, don't. The thing about medieval RPGs these days is that you're not truly role-playing your character. Why? Because you already know how to fight in-game. You know how to read IRL, how to sneak, how to steal. But in this game, you're not you. There is no you. There is only Henry. And Henry is an illiterate blacksmith's apprentice who has practiced with a sword for about 10 minutes and that's all. Try getting into a fight with someone who knows what they're doing, which is pretty much everyone else at the start, and see how long you last. In short, you suck. So good luck trying to play this game like Skyrim and wondering why everyone keeps killing you. You're not you at home, you're Henry, and he doesn't know how to do these things. After you flee home, where there's a very real chance that you'll die multiple times by the way, you'll eventually reach the town of Rate, or Ratai, they keep pronouncing it differently. Same with the captain of the guard. Is it Captain Bernard or Captain Bernard? Here you'll be inducted into the service of Sir Radzig Korbla, the same lord from your home village. He sends you to the local captain for sizing up. The captain throws you into a sparring arena to test your combat knowledge. Before the attack on your village, you had a one-on-one sparring match against a weapons trainer, so at this point, you're pretty confident you know how combat works. But after getting absolutely destroyed by the captain of the guard, he turns to you and in not so many words, says that it seems that you understand just enough about combat to be shit at it. He then teaches you how combat works for real, and it was here where I fell in love with this game. It's not enough just to attack your opponent enough until they fall over and die. Many enemies will also parry your attacks, and some will counter you when you do. You've got to keep an eye on the distance between you and your opponent. You've got to keep the direction you're attacking in mind. You can start attacking in one direction and then feint into another direction to strike at an opening. Combat is very intense and incredibly satisfying when done correctly, and the more you level up with your sword skill, or appropriate weapon skill, the quicker you are in your attacks. But you've also got to spend time yourself sparring and learning and getting better at the combat, because decent armour and a strong sword and high levels are great and all, but it won't make much of a difference if you're not spending the time to practice actually fighting either. And this isn't just the case when it comes to fighting, everything else matters too. Pick up a book at the start of the game and try reading it. You'll quickly find that it's all gibberish. That's because Henry can't read. You have a reading skill that needs leveling up too. After completing a quest to learn the basics of reading, you'll gain, I think it's about 3 levels in it, but that's still not good enough. Many passages and words will still be jumbled, but the more you read and the more you level up your reading skill, the more words will become coherent and finally you'll be able to read as normal. Leveling up your speech will mean you're more likely to pass speech checks. Drinking will let you drink more booze and enjoy the buffs they provide longer before you get drunk. There's a skill for horse riding, one for archery, one for alchemy, another for understanding plants which you then use in alchemy. All of these are vital skills you'll need to survive and thrive in this world, but you'll need to develop these skills yourself by practicing in their respective arts. As a result, new players will find that this game has one of the most brutal, but common sense difficulty curves in any game out there. This game isn't exactly hard, it's just that Henry sucks at the start. As you scale up in skills and levels, enemies won't then suddenly become harder to match your progress. The game actually stays at whatever difficulty setting you selected at the start and doesn't change throughout your whole playthrough. What changes is you. You start getting better and things start getting easier. Because of this, by far the hardest sections of the game are right at the very start, and just know that the more you play this game, the easier it gets. The realism is also apparent in other areas of this game too. For example, the more you get into combat and use your sword, or even get hit, the more your weapons and armour degrade and then get dirty. Then, try showing up into town looking battered and covered in mud and people will comment on it. People will be less likely to offer you good deals in the market if you look like you've just been mugged or if you're covered in blood. And good luck convincing a local noble to help you out if you've just shown up looking like a sack of shit. So make sure you repair your gear, and use the bathhouses regularly to keep up appearances. On top of that, you've got a sleep meter and a hunger meter to keep an eye on, because neglecting that will lead to debuffs on your stamina, which means you'll suck more in combat. But then you can also overeat too, so you've got to make sure you're eating just enough. As for the quests and the story themselves, they're very hit and miss if I'm being honest. The main point of the game is about the ensuing civil war and that sword that your father crafted at the start of the game, which gets stolen, but for the vast majority of the game, you can just go ahead and forget about all of that. It's only at the ends this really comes up. You're mainly just in the service of Sir Radzig and doing errands for him, usually dealing with bandits, investigating bandits, bandit encampments and such. I'd personally say that it's the side quests that are the most enjoyable, and some are very memorable too. After arriving in Rate for the first time, one of the characters you're introduced to is a young noble by the name of Sir Hans Capon. He's an arrogant and pompous young lord who feels that he's better than everyone else, especially some blacksmith's boy from nowhere. This quickly develops into what almost turns out to be a vicious rivalry, before being sent on a mission together, after which this rivalry turns into quite the unlikely friendship. Sir Hans eventually warms to Henry, having seen who he is deep down, and becomes quite taken with him, while you as the player learn that Sir Hans isn't a bad guy after all. He's just bored and wants to live life as he sees fit, but has been tutored and pressured by his father since birth to one day take over the mantle of governorship of the town. In one quest, you meet Sir Hans at the bathhouse. You both end up getting quite drunk, and with him daring you to do reckless stuff. One thing he asks you to do is head to town and retrieve a sack of wine of his that he stored below the bailiff's house. This requires some stealth on the player's part, but after obtaining the goods and bringing it back, Sir Hans can't believe that you actually did it. That wine was never actually his, and he was just joking before and never actually expected you to go do it. But the fact that you went and did raises you greatly in his eyes. You both then get into a fight with a local peasant who thinks you're both fooling around with his girl, but after beating him up and sending him packing, you learn soon the next day that that guy was the newest member of the City Watch, and he failed to report for duty the next day due to a broken nose. You've gotta love the consequences in this game. I've never experienced anything quite like it. Another case involved a character called Father Godwin. During one quest where you're tracking down bandits, you come to one village to investigate. The locals tell you that the parish priest might know something. You ask him, and while it's obvious he knows something, he can't tell you because what he heard was during confession, and that's a sacred vow that he's not willing to break. But not one to let Henry go home empty-handed, Father Godwin tells you to meet him at the tavern at night as he has something that could help. You meet him after dusk at the tavern, but he tells you that before he says anything, you've got to indulge with him on some drinks. You both then get absolutely shit-faced, and what happens next is quite frankly one of the funniest video game cutscenes I've ever seen. The evening you both have puts the sanguine Daedric quest from Skyrim to shame, and even gives the movie The Hangover a run for its money. You both wake up the next morning to realise that Father Godwin is late for holding mass. The problem is that he's too hungover to do it, so after saying the initial prayer, he hands things over to you and you end up having to speech check your way through mass. But while it's obvious so far how much I love this game, there are parts that I'd say work against its favour. Being focused on fun and not realism, like Elder Scrolls for example, makes it more enjoyable for a wider audience, but doesn't offer that same level of immersion that something like Kingdom Come offers. The problem is that a game that's more focused on being real also means that some of the drawbacks of real life are also present in this game. The quest A Needle in a Haystack comes to mind. On paper, I absolutely love this quest and the idea behind it. In practice, I hated every second of it, and I ended up having to cheese the quest just to get out of it. The quest starts off like most do, i.e. looking for bandits. You get lead of a group which takes you to a village with a monastery nearby. You find the bandit group, but in order to join, you've got to assassinate one of their former associates. The problem is that he's gone and joined the monastery for protection. The monastery won't just let anyone in, except for new initiates, and only then initiates who have been invited in. So after a long-winded process of getting a cover story and invitation that involves convincing a local thug that an old man called his mother a whore, you turn up at the monastery to be inducted into the local order. You first have to hand over everything you own, as you won't be needing that anymore, and once you're inside, you are stuck here until you've completed the quest. You're shown around upon arrival and told that you have the rest of the day to look around and do whatever, but you're not allowed to leave, and as of tomorrow, your duties begin. So you inquire with the other initiates to see who your mark is. In short, they all suspect each other. With nothing to show for it, you go to bed and hope that tomorrow will bring better luck. Except after waking up at 7 AM, one of the monks will chastise you because you failed to report for morning prayer, which commences at 4 AM, and you're supposed to be eating with everyone else right now. Turns out that this game isn't fucking around here. While you're a member of the Order, you've got a very strict schedule to keep. Failing to keep it will result in you being punished by being locked in a cell for 24 hours. So I ran down to the dining hall and started eating presumably gruel in peace while listening to scripture. It's also against the rules to talk to anyone during this time. Then I somehow became poisoned and passed out. One of the initiates then wakes me up in the dormitory and hands me a bottle of antidote and health potion. Turns out, he's the guy I'm after and he had poisoned me. Initially to kill me, but then he changed his mind. He wants my help to escape this place, and realising that unless I get out of here too, then I'm going to be spending the rest of the game repeating the same day over and over again, I agree to help him escape. His plan involves only two things. Both simple enough, I thought at first, except in practice I found it to be total opposite. I needed to get a source of blood and either the master keys to the monastery or a lockpick. My plan was as thus: continue my day as normal, and when everyone goes to bed, sneak around the place and scout out what I can find. Doing so led me to learn that I can add an order for blood in the kitchen, and I also found a lockpick behind the main altar where we have morning and evening prayer. With that established, I went back to bed. The next morning, I got up at 4 AM this time and headed for morning prayer. This is where things started going south for me. While you can't get out of your daily duties, you can skip parts of it if you use the wait function. So I waited in the main hall for 2 hours, or until it was time to go eat. But before I could do this, I was caught by one of the monks. Turns out that I was somehow spotted last night sneaking into the kitchen. I was then thrown into a cell for 24 hours and my lockpick was confiscated. So I reloaded the game. Incidentally, saving only works in certain places, i.e. beds or major checkpoints, and unless you have a special item used for saving whenever you want, you can't save whenever you want, and all of my stuff was taken from me when I first came here. Thus my plan changed a little. Reload the game and don't get caught this time. Everything went ahead well, I thought, except I was once again caught during morning prayer and my lockpick was taken from me. Another reload for me. This time, I didn't even bother sneaking. I just went straight to the kitchen, placed an order for blood, and went back to bed. This worked for some reason. So afterwards, I picked up the lockpick and continued throughout the day. I had to wait a whole day for the blood to be delivered, and doing just 1 day in the monastery was doing my fucking head in. So I had the idea of getting caught and thrown in a cell, since at least that's 24 hours, but doing so would mean I'd lose my lockpick. So I stashed it away somewhere, and then got caught hanging out in the kitchen again. 24 hours passed, and this time I snuck into the kitchen and was finally able to swipe the bag of blood. I then headed back to where I stashed the lockpick, only to find out it had despawned. Once again, I reloaded the game. At this point, I was just speedrunning this section. I wanted it over so badly because I was getting sick and tired of going to morning prayer and then waiting in the food hall, then making potions or copying Latin from one page to another. So finally, my plan went as follows. Wait until midnight. Sprint to the kitchen and place an order for blood. Hang around in the kitchen until I get caught and get thrown into a cell for 24 hours. Run back to the kitchen afterwards, grab the blood sack, and hang around again until I get caught. The blood sack is a quest item, so it doesn't get removed from your inventory once you're caught. Spend another 24 hours in the cell. Once out, go to morning prayer and wait for that to end. Then, swipe the lockpick from behind the altar when no one is looking, and on the way to breakfast, hand it all over to the initiate. Then play out the rest of the day as normal until the evening when you meet up with the initiate and you both go ahead and break out of the monastery. This took me half a day to complete. And don't get me started on the Robber Baron quest, which I was only able to complete by convincing the captain of the guard to attempt to parley with a notorious bandit, then challenging him to a duel, baiting him out of his camp during the fight so that once I killed him his men immediately wouldn't turn on me and kill me, and then once I got him into the woods and killed him, sprint as fast as I could back to the captain before I get hacked to bits. It also doesn't help that the action for sleeping in a bed is also the same action for pickpocketing someone, as I've had it a couple of times where I've gone to sleep in a bed in a crowded place because, hey, it was free, only for someone to walk in front of me at the very moment I tried sleeping, leading me to accidentally committing a crime. And I don't understand why the save feature is the way it is. I presume it's to add weight to your actions because messing up or getting killed will mean a loss of progress, meaning that you're going to try harder and that the stakes are higher because you've got more to lose. But then the game also gives you save your schnaps, which lets you manually save whenever you want. So why not just let us save manually whenever we want? Is this to stop us save scumming? Because you can definitely 100% do that already. Also, I'm pretty sure it's not historically accurate that you can make horses spawn out of thin air just by whistling. In conclusion, since I'm tempted to not say any more just in case you decide to play this for yourself, but you should definitely decide to play this one for yourself. It's about as realistic and historically accurate in its attention to detail as it gets. The graphics are gorgeous, and the soundtrack is appropriately banging too. Hang on, did I mention that Brian Blessed is one of the characters in this game? I nearly went through this whole video without mentioning that! Wow, just as well I remembered.
I thought you were urban. What do you want? Is it? Fresh horses?
There's so much to do in this game as there's plenty of quests, side activities, and just interesting stuff to check out. There are also a lot of repeatable quests too if you want to fill up your time more, and there's always time for practice and training in the arts of war to improve your combat performance. Ultimately, I would say that my favourite game of all time, which doesn't exist yet, mind you, lies somewhere between this game and Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. And this is great timing too, since the second game has only recently been announced as coming out soon. And I would also like to take this opportunity to let everyone know that considering the attention to detail and how big budgeted this game clearly is, this is Warhorse Studios' only game. They've only ever made one game so far, and it's this. That is mental. But while I love this game to pieces, I will admit that it's not for everyone. The intro will kick your ass like your ass is going out of fashion, so if you want to get everything out of this game, you've got to go into this one with a lot of patience and accept the reality that you're probably going to die a lot near the start. But once you've overcome that hurdle, there is an amazing game waiting for you on the other side. Just remember to take a bath every now and then. Am I referring to the game or not? You decide. True review out!